I kept $10 million in my mother's safe. The next morning, she vanished. No trace, no call, no clue. Just an empty house and a silence so loud it rang in my ears. You'd think I'd cry or scream or fall apart. But I didn't. I laughed, not out of madness, not out of spite. I laughed because of what I found inside that safe after she disappeared. But before I tell you what was in there, what changed everything, I want to take you back. Back to the snowy little town where I was raised. Back to the woman I trusted more than anyone else in the world. My name is Eleanor Grant. I'm 36 years old. And just last month, I sold my AI health tech company for $45 million. I should have been celebrating. I should have been shopping for a lake house or boarding a plane to somewhere warm and quiet. Instead, I was standing in my childhood home in Vermont, staring at an open safe, wondering if I had just been betrayed by the only family I had left. The story I'm about to tell you is not about money. Not really. It's about trust. About what happens when the very people you die for choose to disappear. But also, it's about what they leave behind. My mother, Linda, was the kind of woman who used to write me little notes in my lunchbox. She taught fourth grade for over 20 years. She believed in hard work, saving every receipt, and never going to bed angry. My little brother Kyle was always more of a wanderer. He never quite landed on anything. One month it was photography, the next it was a startup idea that never got off the ground. They were the only two people I ever truly shared my life with. So when I needed a place to store $10 million for just one night, I chose the only place that had ever felt safe. Home. And I trusted the woman who had once told me, no matter how big you get, Ellie, you'll always be my little girl. But the next morning, everything I believed about my family unraveled. And what I found inside that safe changed everything. I was born and raised in a tiny Vermont town where the winters came early and stayed too long, and everyone knew your business before you even finished living it. Our house sat at the edge of a frozen lake with creaky floorboards, drafty windows, and a chimney that smoked sideways when the wind came from the east. My mother, Linda, was the kind of woman people called salt of the earth, and not just because she made the best cornbread at every church potluck. She was a school teacher for over 2 decades, always with ink-stained fingers, always correcting essays in bed under the glow of a mismatched bedside lamp. She never missed a parent-teacher meeting, even when it wasn't for her own kids. She taught me that life owed you nothing, that hard work mattered more than talent, and that trust, once broken, was almost impossible to glue back together. I worshipped her. I also feared disappointing her. After my father died when I was 9, hit by a drunk driver on his way home from the night shift, my mother never remarried. She poured everything into us, into me, into my younger brother Kyle. Kyle was born 2 years after the accident. I used to joke that he was our family's second chance, but he never took to structure the way I did. While I buried myself in school and ambition, Kyle drifted. He was charming, funny, easy to love, and impossible to rely on. He never finished college, but he always had a plan, a new idea, a new friend who had a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I helped him more times than I can count, paid off debts, sent rent, covered hospital bills from a bar fight he didn't start. My mother always defended him. He's just sensitive, she'd say. He needs time. But time was all Kyle ever seemed to need. Meanwhile, I clawed my way out. I won a scholarship to Stanford, worked 3 jobs while studying biomedical engineering, and then launched a startup in my tiny apartment with 2 friends and a maxed-out credit card. We built diagnostic AI software that helped rural hospitals detect early signs of stroke and heart disease. For the first 3 years, I barely slept. But we broke through, and 5 years after we started a major healthcare group, offered to acquire us for $45 million. My cut after taxes and equity splits was just under 32. I was finally free. Free to build something lasting, to give back, to do what mattered. And I wanted to start right back where it all began in Vermont. I found a decommissioned textile mill near our town abandoned since the 80s, and I made a plan to convert it into a rural health and education center. It would offer screenings, job training, even startup grants for local teens. I wanted to do something real, something with roots. But because of complicated financial regulations involving the public-private partnership I'd joined to fund the project, I had to move $10 million in cash to secure the land contract. just for 48 hours. A technicality, they said, but one that meant the money had to be in my control. I didn't trust any commercial storage or holding firm in town. And when I thought of a safe place somewhere I could sleep for one night where no one would suspect a thing, I thought of my childhood home. My mother's house. The same home with the old wood stove, the framed spelling bee certificates, the safe in the bedroom closet, where she used to hide Christmas gifts, and my high school report cards. 3 years ago, I'd upgraded that safe for her something modern, digital fireproof because she kept saying she didn't trust the bank with her personal papers. I paid for the install myself. I thought it was secure. I thought it was symbolic. That home would always protect us. That my mother would. The night I arrived with the money, I hugged her longer than usual. She didn't let go quickly. Kyle was there too, said he was helping her shovel the driveway. His smile looked tight, his hands a little too clean for real work. But I didn't ask questions. I didn't want to question family. We had dinner together, beef stew, cornbread, the usual. It was snowing outside, the kind of thick, quiet snow that makes the whole world feel paused. I felt safe. I felt like I'd come full circle. I went to bed in my old room, same faded wallpaper, same twin bed that once held all my teenage dreams. And in the morning, they were gone. The sun rose late that morning, as it always did in January, casting a dull blue light through the thin curtains of my childhood bedroom. For a few seconds, I forgot everything: the company sale, the $10 million, the safe. I was just a girl again, waking up in her mother's house, comforted by the faint creaks of the floorboards and the smell of coffee drifting up the stairs. But there was no smell, no sound, just silence. I sat up, rubbed the sleep from my eyes, and called out Mom. No answer. I wrapped myself in a robe and padded down the hallway. Her bedroom door was wide open. The bed was made, untouched. I checked the kitchen. No dishes, no sign of breakfast. The car was gone from the driveway. I checked the guest room. Kyle wasn't there either. At first, I wasn't worried. Maybe they had gone into town for groceries. Maybe the snow had cleared and they decided to go out for breakfast. But there was something off. Too neat. Too quiet. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. I walked to the master bedroom closet, slid the shoe rack aside, and saw the safe. My stomach dropped. The safe's digital keypad was dark. The door was open just enough to show the empty inside. I stepped closer, hands trembling, heart pounding. I opened it fully. Nothing. The 3 duffel bags gone. $10 million in cash vanished. For a moment, my mind refused to accept it. I stared into the empty steel box, waiting for something to change, for the bags to reappear like a glitch in the Matrix. But nothing happened. I stumbled back, my knees weak, and leaned against the wall for support. Then I saw it. A piece of paper folded neatly, propped against a family photo on the nightstand. My name, written in my mother's handwriting. Ellie. I opened it with shaking hands. Dear Ellie, I'm sorry. I know you're scared and confused right now, but please believe this wasn't easy for me. Kyle and I need a fresh start, a real one. You have everything now you've made it. You'll be fine. This is our turn. Please don't look for us. Mom. I read it twice, then again. I didn't cry. Not yet. I felt hollow, disconnected, as if I were watching a stranger read a script from a bad movie. I called her phone, straight to voicemail. I called Kyle's. It rang once, then disconnected. Blocked. I called again. Again. 16 times in total. Nothing. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the note, the last piece of her I had. Then I called the police. The first officer arrived in under 20 minutes. A young man with kind eyes and a notebook too clean to be useful. Behind him came Detective Elena Marks, late 50s, sharp posture, no nonsense. She listened carefully as I explained. $10 million. A safe, a mother, a brother, both gone. She asked all the questions you'd expect. Why did you bring that much cash here? Why not use a secure holding firm? Did you have any written agreements with your mother? I gave her the bank withdrawal slip. Showed her the emails with the property developer explaining the cash clause. Gave her my lawyer's number. But still, her expression didn't soften. I understand this is painful, she said finally, but from a legal standpoint, this is murky. You placed the money in your mother's possession voluntarily. That could be construed as a gift. A gift I was buying a property. She knew that. They both knew. She nodded, understood. But without a written contract stating the money was for a specific use, or that you retained ownership proving theft is complicated, you're telling me they could steal $10 million from me and just walk away. I'm saying it will take time. And it won't be simple. I felt heat rise in my throat, the kind that comes before screaming or sobbing. But I didn't do either. I sat there stunned as the detective left to file her report and start the process of issuing alerts. Jason, my fiancé, arrived an hour later. He'd driven up from Boston the moment I called. When he walked in, I broke down. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet collapse into his arms. They took everything I whispered. He held me tightly. "We'll get it back," he said. But I didn't believe him. The next few days were a blur of interviews, documents, phone calls. I hired a private investigator. He found a trail. Security footage of Kyle renting a car under a fake name. A flight booked under Linda Grayson, a variation of my mother's maiden name. They were good. Not brilliant, but practiced. Their plan hadn't been last minute. They'd been preparing. I started to see the signs I'd ignored. The questions at dinner, the too casual glances, the way Kyle had been overly helpful and how Mom had lingered at the safe when I opened it. They knew. They were watching. Planning. Every memory now felt poisoned. Every act of kindness reinterpreted as manipulation. I stopped sleeping. I barely ate. Jason tried to help, but every time he spoke, it sounded like noise. My head was full of static. I wanted to scream at someone. At my mother, at Kyle, at myself, especially at myself. How could I be so stupid? How could I trust them? They were my family. That's how. That's why. And still, deep down, I kept hoping there was more to it. That maybe there was a reason, a mistake, some explanation that made it all make sense. But no reason came. Only silence. Only empty rooms and unanswered calls. I was alone again. Rich, but robbed. Successful, but broken. And somewhere out there, the people I loved most were living on the money I had earned with blood and time and fear. And I didn't even know why. The days that followed felt unreal, like I was drifting through someone else's life. Every hour blurred into the next, and every place I went smelled like betrayal. I stayed at a motel just outside of town, unable to sleep in the house where it all happened. The kitchen table felt like a crime scene. The guest room still held the indentation of where Kyle had slept. Even the living room where we once played Scrabble on snowy nights felt like a stage, like every word ever said in that house was scripted and hollow. The private investigator I hired was a man named Tom Reese, a retired FBI agent who now ran a discreet agency specializing in missing persons and financial crimes. He was calm, efficient, and never gave me false hope. On day 2, he told me the trail was already going cold. Kyle had used a fake ID to rent a car, then ditched it near a regional airfield in New Hampshire. No CCTV cameras past the entrance. No passenger logs for private flights. No clear direction. Linda Grayson, my mother's fabricated identity, had a passport issued through a shell embassy in the Caribbean. It was sophisticated, not amateur. Whoever helped her knew exactly what they were doing. I started to understand the scope of it. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. They hadn't just woken up and decided to run. They planned this. They studied how to disappear. They mapped it out. They practiced. That realization cut deeper than the money ever could, because it meant every call, every hug, every laugh for the past few months might have been part of the setup. Tom dug into phone records and email activity. He found an encrypted messaging service on Kyle's laptop, one that erased messages after reading. No backups, no recovery. My mother's old iPad showed web searches from weeks prior, countries with no extradition, how to launder small amounts of cash, best fake identity kits. I stared at those browser histories like they were confessions, and still it didn't feel real. I tried to reach out to extended family, but my mom had distanced herself from most of them years ago. Old grudges, lost birthdays. I called my Aunt Margaret in Michigan hoping for some kind of clue. She hadn't heard from Linda in 6 years. Your mother always had a sharp edge, she said quietly. She just hid it better when you were young. Those words echoed in my head for days. A sharp edge. I started therapy at Jason's urging. Dr. Laura Mendez specialized in trauma and loss. During our first session, I couldn't stop fidgeting. My thoughts ran like wildfire. I kept saying I just wanted to understand. I needed a reason, something to make it all make sense. She said people who are betrayed often crave logic, but betrayal is not logical. It's primal, emotional, messy, and it often says more about the betrayer than the betrayed. I didn't like that answer. It felt like letting them off the hook, but the more I sat with it, the more I realized I wasn't just mourning the money, I was grieving the story I had told myself my whole life. The story where my mother was a saint and Kyle was just lost. That story was dead now, and I didn't know what to replace it with. Jason stayed with me for a while, but I could feel the strain between us growing. He wanted to help, but he was helpless. He wanted me to sleep, to eat, to take the consulting offer from a med tech firm in San Francisco, but I couldn't think about work. I couldn't think about anything except the safe, and the empty space where my family used to be. One night, I asked Tom a question I'd been avoiding. Do you think they'll ever come back? He looked at me. No pity in his eyes. No. They've planned this for too long. People who go this far, they don't look back. They don't come home. I nodded. I didn't cry. I had run out of tears days ago. Instead, I went back to the house one last time. I needed something, anything to remind me that not everything in that place was a lie. I walked through every room, touching the edges of picture frames, lifting old sweaters still folded in drawers. I found one of my childhood notebooks in a plastic bin in the attic, and a crumpled drawing I made when I was 5, me and Mom holding hands under a rainbow. I brought them with me even though they felt like relics from a life I no longer believed in. In the kitchen on the back of the pantry door, I saw a mark where my height had been measured year by year. The last one was from when I was 17, the night before I left for college. My mother had written next to it, "So proud of you, my beautiful girl." I stared at those words for a long time. I didn't know what they meant anymore. Maybe she meant them then. Maybe she didn't. That night back at the motel, I opened a new file on my laptop. I typed out everything I knew, every detail, every timeline, every clue. I started building a case not just for the police, but for myself. A structure, a way to make sense of the senseless. I needed something to hold on to, and deep down, something in me refused to accept that this was the end of the story. 10 days after the money vanished, something shifted. Not in the investigation, not in the case, but in me. I had been waking each morning with a heaviness in my chest, the kind that made it hard to breathe before I even sat up in bed. But that morning was different. I didn't feel lighter exactly, just more focused. Less like a victim. More like someone preparing for a final exam they hadn't chosen to take. I drove back to the house one more time, despite promising myself I was done with it. I told myself I needed to check the mailbox, but the truth is, I wanted to be close to something familiar. I parked in the driveway and stared at the porch steps. I hadn't noticed the paint chipping there in years. I walked inside. The house still smelled faintly of lavender and wood smoke. I wandered through the living room past the empty coat rack, the unplugged TV, and into my mother's room. I stood in front of the open safe, half expecting the emptiness to have changed. It hadn't. But something made me turn away from the closet and glance at the old dresser across the room. The bottom drawer was slightly ajar. I pulled it open. Inside were stacks of old papers, receipts, letters, pension documents, and something else. A small velvet pouch. I opened it. A flash drive. Taped to the drive was a folded slip of paper in my mother's handwriting. If you're reading this, it means I had to disappear. I'm sorry. I did it to protect you. I stood there frozen, staring at those words. My hands trembled as I pocketed the drive and left the house. I didn't stop moving until I reached the motel. I plugged the drive into my laptop, half expecting it to be empty. It wasn't. There was one file. A video titled Only Ellie. I clicked play. My mother's face appeared on the screen. Her eyes were tired, her voice low and calm. She looked older than I remembered. "Ellie," she began, "if you're watching this, it means I'm gone. And you've probably already called me a thief. I wouldn't blame you, but what you don't know is that I didn't take your money. I protected it." She paused. Her lip quivered slightly. "You were in danger, and you didn't know it." She went on to explain what had happened. A month before the acquisition of your company, she said she received a strange phone call. The man claimed to be from the IRS, but when she asked questions, he hung up. Something about it felt off, so she started digging. She contacted a retired accountant who had helped with my father's estate years ago. He looked into the acquisition and the holding companies involved. What he found terrified her. My company, at least on paper, was clean, but the venture capital group funding the acquisition had ties to shell companies under federal investigation for money laundering. If I deposited the cash from the sale into the project account and used it to fund the health center, I could become entangled in the investigation. Or worse, framed. "I know how you are," my mother said on the video. "You wouldn't have listened. You would have tried to fix it. You always try to fix everything, but this wasn't yours to fix. So I did the only thing I could. I disappeared. I had Kyle help me move the money, but not for us. It's safe. I moved it to a trust in your name, but with legal protections. In 30 days, if nothing happens, the funds will be returned to your personal account automatically. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. But you needed to be forced to stop. You needed time." My chest tightened. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the laptop. She hadn't stolen the money. She had shielded it. I sat in silence for several minutes, replaying the video in my head. My mind raced. Why hadn't she just told me? Why vanish? Why make me suffer like this? But even as I asked those questions, I already knew the answer. She didn't trust the system. She didn't trust that I wouldn't bulldoze ahead, convinced I could outthink the risk. And she was right. I would have done exactly that. I always had. I reopened the drive. There was another folder. Inside, scans of legal documents, trust agreements, withdrawal protections, legal advice from a private offshore attorney. The entire paper trail was there. Verified. Legitimate. The money was in a secure account in the Cayman Islands registered under a blind trust. I called Richard Bennett, my lawyer, and sent everything over. He confirmed the documents were real. "This is extraordinary," he said. "She basically staged a theft to protect you from legal fallout." I exhaled for the first time in what felt like weeks. The money was safe. My name was clean. But the truth wasn't simple. My mother had still lied. She'd still run. Kyle had still gone along with it. And they had let me suffer without explanation. That part didn't disappear, but something else came into focus. She hadn't done it out of greed. She'd done it out of fear. Fear that the world I operated in, the world of tech and legal loopholes and capital deals, was about to crush me. And she'd done the only thing she knew: remove me from the equation. For a moment, I laughed. Not a joyful laugh. A dry, breathless release of tension. I had been living in grief, fury, and betrayal. And now I was sitting in a cheap motel with a flash drive in my hand and the sudden surreal realization that I hadn't lost $10 million. I had gained something else. Clarity. I didn't know where she was, or when I'd see her again. But I knew she wasn't a thief. And I knew the truth had been sitting quietly waiting for me to be still long enough to find it. That night, I slept for the first time in 10 days. Not because everything was fixed, but because I finally understood. The safe had been empty, but the plan had been full. And my mother, she'd never stopped protecting me, not even when it meant becoming the villain in my story. It took another 2 weeks to find her. Tom, the investigator, had been quietly running searches behind the scenes, cross-checking passport activity and offshore property records. It turned out my mother had purchased a small cottage in a hillside village outside of Siena, Italy, using one of the trusts connected to the account. It wasn't lavish. It was quiet, hidden, a place to disappear. I didn't tell anyone, not Jason, not even Richard. I booked the flight myself, landed in Florence, and took a train through the countryside. As the landscape rolled past, green and soft and far too peaceful for the chaos in my head, I kept wondering what I would say when I saw her. I rehearsed a dozen versions. Angry ones, forgiving ones. None of them felt real. I took a cab from the station and walked the last mile alone, dragging my suitcase behind me over cobblestones and gravel paths. Her house was simple whitewashed stone with ivy climbing the walls. There were flowers on the windowsill and wind chimes. She had always loved wind chimes. I stood at the gate for a long time before I knocked. When she opened the door, she didn't look surprised. She looked tired and older and like someone who'd been waiting for a storm. "Hi, Ellie," she said softly. I didn't answer. I just looked at her. Her eyes, her hands, the slope of her shoulders. Everything felt familiar and foreign at once. She stepped aside and I walked in. The house smelled like sage and lemon. There were books on the table, knitting supplies by the window. It wasn't a hideout. It was a retreat. She made tea, poured it into chipped porcelain cups that didn't match. We sat across from each other at a small table in silence for several minutes. I saw the video I said eventually. She nodded but didn't speak. "You could have told me," I continued. "You could have called." "You wouldn't have listened," she replied gently. "You never have." That hurt, because it was true. I always needed to be right, to be in control. I stared at the tea in my hands, then back at her. "You let me believe you'd betrayed me." Her face softened and her eyes welled. "I know, and I hate myself for that. But I didn't know any other way to make you stop, to make you think. I was scared, Ellie. Really scared. I thought I was going to lose you not to death, but to something worse. To a system that doesn't care about people like you. People who play by the rules." My throat tightened. I wanted to stay angry. I wanted to make her feel what I had felt. But instead I said, "You saved me, and you broke me." Both at the same time. "I didn't expect it to go so far," she whispered. "I thought maybe you'd find the drive after a few days. I didn't think you'd—" She trailed off. "Fall apart," I offered. She didn't answer. Because she didn't have to. "Where's Kyle?" I asked. "He's in Portugal," she said. "He wasn't supposed to stay involved, but I needed help moving everything. He didn't take any of the money, if that's what you're wondering." "I didn't let him." I nodded. That mattered somehow. "So what now?" I asked. "Now," she said, "you go live your life. Go build your center. Use the money. It's yours again. And I stay here. And we never talk again. That's up to you." I looked around the little house. The quiet. The simplicity. "Why here?" I asked. "Because it doesn't ask anything of me," she said. "Because I can breathe." We sat a little longer. Then I stood. She walked me to the gate. Before I left, I turned to her. "You hurt me," I said. "I know," she said. "But I love you," I added. She closed her eyes and her voice cracked. I've never stopped. I left without hugging her. Not because I didn't want to, but because I needed time. Trust doesn't return all at once. Sometimes it rebuilds in pieces like a house after a storm. I flew home the next day, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like something was missing. 3 months later, I finally signed the closing papers on the new Health and Education Center. Not the original property I had planned to buy with the $10 million, but something better. It was an old library building downtown, smaller in scale but richer in history. Red brick walls, oak floors, stained glass windows, the kind of place that already had stories in its bones. I walked through it alone the first night with the keys in my pocket, my footsteps echoing through empty halls. I ran my fingers along the dusty banisters, looked out through windows that had seen decades of winters, and whispered to no one. "We're starting fresh." I didn't name it after myself. I didn't name it after my company. I named it the Second Light, because that's what it felt like. A second chance, a second truth, a light that flickered through even the darkest version of the story. The money had returned exactly as my mother said it would. No delays, no complications. It came back into my account silently, like a wave receding after the storm. My lawyer, Richard, triple-checked the legality. It was clean, anonymous, completely mine again. Jason came back too in time. We had space. We needed it. But when I told him everything, when I explained what had really happened, he didn't run. He didn't judge. He simply said, "You're stronger than I've ever seen you. Not harder, just clearer." And I think he was right. I hadn't become cynical. I hadn't shut myself off from the world. But I had learned something about boundaries, about instinct, about the difference between guilt and loyalty. My mother and I exchanged a few letters in the months that followed. Handwritten, slow, thoughtful. No emails, no calls, no pressure. We were rebuilding something not on a screen but on paper, carefully, with space to be honest, with room to forgive. I learned she was volunteering at a community garden in Siena. She'd started teaching English to local children. Kyle, she said, had begun therapy. He wanted to get clean, stay away from schemes, start something honest for once in his life. I hoped it was true, but I didn't need proof. Not anymore. The biggest shift wasn't what I learned about them. It was what I learned about myself. That I could survive betrayal and not become bitter. That I could be wrong, deeply painfully wrong, and still move forward. That trusting people was still worth it even when it breaks you. Because sometimes broken things reveal the strength of what remains. I started sharing my story quietly in small rooms, at business forums, at women's groups, at community gatherings, not to shame anyone, not to go viral, but because I saw how many people were holding their own version of what I had lived through, stories of betrayal, of silence, of losing what they thought they could never lose. And I wanted them to know they weren't alone. One evening, after speaking at a workshop for first-generation entrepreneurs, a woman in her 60s came up to me and said, "It wasn't about the money, was it?" I shook my head. "It never is." She nodded like she already knew the answer. "It's always the meaning behind it, what we thought it represented." That stayed with me. Because it was true. The money had been a symbol of safety, of success, of a future I had built from nothing. And for a moment, it had all been ripped away. But what remained after the dust settled was something more powerful. The ability to rebuild, to trust again, to forgive slowly and fully, to walk through pain without dragging it behind me like a chain. I still keep the original safe, not because I use it, but because it reminds me of what was lost and what was found. The note my mother left sits inside it along with the flash drive and the pouch I discovered that day. I read them once in a while. Not to reopen the wound, but to remind myself that healing isn't forgetting. It's remembering differently. The last time I saw the house where I grew up, I didn't go inside. I stood on the sidewalk and looked at it from a distance. It had been sold to a new family now. There were toys on the porch, a tricycle in the yard, laughter inside. That felt right. The house was ready for new stories. So was I. The world hadn't changed. People would still disappoint each other. Trust would still break, but something inside me had shifted. A quiet resilience, a calm awareness. Not everyone would stay, not everyone would be honest, but that didn't mean I had to live in fear. Trust wisely. That's what I tell people now. Trust slowly, but don't stop trusting. Because love, even when it bends, even when it hurts, is still the most human thing we have. And sometimes the ones who vanish do so, not to hurt us, but to save us. I can't explain every detail of what my mother did. I don't know if I would have done the same. But I know this. She chose me over my pride, over my anger, over being understood. And in some strange, painful way, that is love too. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted and somehow found the strength to keep going, to rebuild, to believe again, your story matters. You are not alone. Share your story in the comments below. Let someone else find courage in your truth. And if this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of your own resilience, please like this video and subscribe. This is more than a channel. It's a place for people who've been broken and chose to heal anyway. Remember, betrayal says more about them than it ever will about you. Trust wisely, but never stop trusting.